You probably understand the value in reading, but you don't read as much as you would like to. You don't remember what you read. Whenever you read, your life doesn't actually change, and you know that your system for reading is just bad. Over the past couple of years, reading has completely altered my life. Not only do I read more, I read about a book every other week, but I read better. I understand what I read more. I apply it better. And I'm able to do that thing now that podcasters and debaters and public intellectuals can do, where when they're talking about something that they're interested in, they can draw a quote or a stat or some piece of knowledge from a book they read however long ago. In this video, I'm going to show you how I read better, and not necessarily on how to retain what you read, although you will also end up remembering more of what you read if you listen to this video. I'm going to show you how to read in a way that's not just procrastination, but instead where you get something out of reading. Specifically non-fiction though, books are tools so as to learn a specific topic, not simply to engage the mind in capturing stories. Although there might be some value in that, that's not what's been a good spend of my time. Read books directionally. I hear advice from other creators that you should read what interests you and what entertains you, and then once you build the habit of reading, you switch to harder, more productive books. I don't think that's horrible advice. However, it should be within a certain framing. Again, for the sake of this video, books are tools. So you're gonna wanna read what interests you directionally. Read what grabs your attention that is related to the field that you're trying to grow in. For instance, if I have a goal to completely upgrade my mental health, I've introduced the problem that needs solving. Now, within that frame of the goal, I will read what interests me. I'm interested in identity and the subconscious, so I might read Psychocybernetics or Inner Size. But I'm also interested in philosophy and theology, so I might pick up Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives by Elder Thaddeus of Vitovnica. So in multiple areas, I am still reading about thoughts and how to improve my mental and spiritual health, although not exclusively just about that. But I am reading within the frame of a certain problem that I am trying to work on and or solve. Everyone has at least a topic that they would just know more about than the average person would. You might know all the stats of all the NBA players or know how to play poker a little too well. Imagine you took 1 to 2 years and just wrote down in detail everything you know about that topic. You refined it, you made it clear. Everything you wrote down, that book would probably be very beneficial as it pertains to that topic that you know a lot about. That is literally what every book is that we are going to read. It's essentially free mentorship because you're taking synthesized information from someone who's actually experienced or done what you're reading about. This is why, when applied, books are like a fast track towards progress, because you're getting knowledge that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. This is why I view books as tools, because there are enough books that attack the specific problems in my life where someone who has actually been through what I'm going through has gone to the other side and can now tell me how they did it. It's a little bit wild if you think about it. There are 3 categories of books. Alex O'Connor mentioned this in one of his way earlier videos, and it was on how to read better, and it's something that actually stuck with me. You want to get into your head this framework that there are 3 categories of books to you. The first one is books that you are interested in and that you know you're going to read. The books that if you were to set aside time for good reading, it would be those books. You want to get through those books. Second category is books that kind of mildly interest you, but you're not quite sure when you're going to get around to them. And the third category are books that you know you're not going to finish. Something that has been a game changer is Alex O'Connor said that you should have the second category of book on your person at all times. Like I kind of alluded to, any book in that first category, you want to save for that time that you set aside to, as Alex puts it, properly read the book. However, I have a few books that I'd like to get through, but I know I'm probably never going to sit down and read those books instead of the books that I'm like super interested in. For example, this book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I know, the whole internet's gonna kill me, but after reading it for a little bit, I found it really not that interesting. Really click for me. It didn't feel that edifying. For anyone who hasn't read it, it's kind of just ancient tidbits of wisdom from Marcus Aurelius pertaining to Stoic philosophy and stuff. And some sections are only a few sentences at a time, which makes this book good for this specific reading tip. I knew after reading a little bit into it that I was never going to take my time that I set aside to read this book. And so what I would do is I would keep this book in my backpack for when I went to school, and kind of any time that I had finished my classwork early, or I had a few minutes here and there, I would whip out this book and just read a few sentences, a few sections. So even though I really didn't find it that interesting, I managed to slowly work my way through it just because I had it on me all the time. Although that highlights another key point, which is that you need to make time for reading, even if it's just a chapter a day, which is a really nice goal. Reading the right books can literally change your life, as I'm sure you're aware because you clicked on this video. If you say that you don't have time, show me your screen time. This method I'm describing for books like these is really for those transitionary periods in the day. It's a more productive way to spend those spare change amounts of time throughout your day than scrolling. I should be honest and transparent about one thing. This method works. However, it's a matter of priority. Recently, I've been more intentional about having a low information diet, a low consumption diet. And so I am really sticking to 1 or 2 books at a time. I'm not letting much more input of literature into my brain to influence me. The difference for when you're gonna want to stick to 1 or 2 books and just work on getting through those books specifically, or when you're gonna wanna do this method, is what you're solving for. Right now, not only am I solving specifically for a low information, a low consumption diet, but also the books that I'm reading are solving very specific problems in my life. And I just want the input for those very niche solutions that I'm looking for. But when I was doing this method, my priorities were a little bit different. I was solving for expansion and coverage of new ideas. I was also solving for volume of books in a healthy manner. And so I just wanted to preface that although I am sure that this method works, you will read more and you will get through books that you didn't think that you would previously. Right now, I have temporarily taken a break from this method because my priorities have shifted and I'm really lasered in on just 1 or 2 books at a time. Okay, I'm actually excited. Now that we've gone over the general philosophy about how I go about reading, we can get into more of that nitty-gritty stuff, the stuff that inspired me to make this video. If you do it right, like I mentioned in the intro, reading can literally alter your life. I know the reputation of reading is tainted by being forced to in school, especially with books that you don't want to read, but reading is a fast track to the solutions for specific problems. It makes you better at connecting, it makes you more interesting to talk to, and if you do it correctly, it can make you more solution-oriented. So this part I'm excited for. First things first, I would recommend annotating or taking notes on what you read in some way. There are multiple studies showing that highlighting doesn't actually help you retain what you read any more than you would have normally, but that's not the point. I would recommend highlighting for one thing and one thing only, which is that when you go back through the book the second time, reading the book a second time? Yeah, we'll get to that. You can quickly glance and see what was of importance on each page. You're gonna be reading books more than once, because remember, books are tools. Chances are you're not going to instantly remember everything that you read and apply it, and so you're going to want to go back and continue and reread what's really impactful to you. Besides highlighting, something else that I saw in another video is this bracketing formula where you go through and you bracket certain sections and rate it on a scale of 1 to 3 stars. That's pretty helpful too when you're glancing through specific chapters. You're just like, oh, this section in this chapter I know is really important. And the bracketing method is really helpful because it's way faster than highlighting. It's just... Finally, what's been very impactful for me when I do it is taking notes in the margins of my books. And a lot of people, including you, might have had the problem where people say to take notes in the margins of the book, but you don't exactly know what to write. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, that doesn't exactly help you. What you want to do is you want to connect it to other things you know. And so if you see something that reminds you of a YouTube video, or that reminds you of a podcast, or a quote, or another book, or something else in the same book, you want to write that and make the connection. Because a huge part of memory is association, is the connection between something that you don't really know and something that's already important to you. That's such a huge part of memory. Secondly, finish what you read. Now, this is not something you'll always have the privilege of being able to do when you're reading, but ideally you want to finish what you're reading before you put the book down. That doesn't mean you have to read the whole book in one setting, or even that you have to read each chapter in one sitting. You know those chunks in a chapter that has like the bold subtitle? A lot of times I'll just read through 1 or 2 of those sections, those chunks. That does a couple things. One of them being, it doesn't cut the author's thoughts off erratically while you're reading, but also your brain hates open loops. Hates them. Makes your life so much harder because first of all, you have to go back and reread what you read in the last session and try to get back into the flow and emotion that you were in previously to continue reading. But also if you have an open loop in your brain, and meaning something unresolved, your brain will kind of be meditating on that in the background. And over time, it will build up tension. This is actually really key because you might experience something called brain fog, and that's a contributor to that. But also what I found personally is that as this underlying tension builds up, I start to make unwise decisions. I don't, in the moment, feel tense, but this unresolved stimulation has been building up and that tension keeps building, and then I do something unwise or stupid, or I waste time to cope with the fact that in the background my brain is just full of stuff. You don't want too many open loops because over time, even though you might not recognize it, that's going to build tension in you. Don't watch a movie and stop 2/3 of the way through over and over and over again. Are tools. And so if you're reading something that's genuinely not serving you, put the book down. I know you might be like, no, that's contradictory. You just said not to put the book down until you finish. That'll create an open loop in your brain. The difference is your attitude towards the book. If you go into a new book knowing that you're going to go through the table of contents, you're going to read a couple sections and decide whether you want to mentally commit to the book. And then after that process of vetting whether it's worth your time, you choose to put it down. That's not going to be an open loop for your brain. That's a resolved proposition. You're not going to be mentally ruminating on what if I read that book because you discerned that it wasn't worth your time after going through it a little bit and consciously chose to save your time. That's different than making the mental commitment to, I'm starting this book and I want to finish it. And then every time you're reading a chapter, you're stopping halfway through, or you're stopping 2/3 of the way through. I know we have this autistic arbitrary standard that if our eyes don't glance across every word, we can't count the book as a tally in our mind of a book that we finish. That's another reason why this frame as books being tools is so useful, is because you realize that you're reading for your benefit and not to post a reading list of look at all the books that I read this year at the end of the year. Read in a way to improve yourself. So put a book down if it's not giving you value. A good example of this is this book. Now, I don't want to disrespect the author in any way, but this book is called The Blue Ocean Strategy. And I should preface saying the Blue Ocean Strategy, the strategy they're talking about, is a really good one. The book is really boring. Maybe I didn't have the right mindset when I was reading it, but the writing style consists of telling you a concept and then showing you 45 examples of that concept and then doing that over and over and over. And I got to the point where it didn't feel like a good spend of my time. I felt like I generally understood the concepts that I was learning, and maybe there was more later in the book that I should have kept reading for. Maybe I'll finish it one day, but I put the book down, and I don't feel bad about it either. That book wasn't serving me. It wasn't a good spend of my time, and my time is worth too much to me to waste it on something that isn't benefiting. Put your books down, dude. Get good books. If you have any interest in reading at all, or if you feel like you should read more, you are probably using this sometimes valid cope of, I don't know what books to read. This is my system for choosing exclusively good books to read. Good books to spend your time on. If a book stops being useful, like I mentioned, I filter it out. Time is too precious to arbitrarily commit to something that doesn't help me. I almost always only take books on recommendation. If I see someone online, or preferably in person, who has done what I want to do or has the results that I want to have, and they recommend this book for the process that they went through, I'll usually buy the book. Book recaps or review videos are usually good compendiums, I just learned that word, for which books to read in certain areas. But again, in the same way that you should take advice from people that you want to be like in that area, you take book recommendations the same way. This is crucial. You wouldn't take financial advice from someone who's homeless. So definitely don't take finance book advice from someone who doesn't have good finances. There's a book, dude, I love this. This one. In this book, Unscripted by MJ DeMarco, he's going through almost this negative visualization of the normal path. Go to college and get in the rat race and everything. And regardless of whether you agree with that or not, he's going through like growing older. Just going through the motions. Climb the corporate ladder, wake up, hit snooze, and wake up again, get into a routine, work, traffic, Seinfeld reruns, sleep,
Repeat this 4 times a week. Grow older. Follow fashion. Grow older. Hear your biological clock ticking. Worry that you're still single. Grow older. And so he's saying all of these things that are monotonous that people do that are average, and kind of hinting at that this average life leads to average or usually less than good results. And he says this line: take financial advice brokered by broke brokers. Learn how to get rich from people who aren't rich. And that's such a good line for advice in general. Take book recommendations in areas from people who have the results that you want in that area. And this advice isn't bulletproof. It's not even worth getting, but there's a book over there called How to Steal Like an Artist. I got it because Colin and Samir, who are creators that I really respect, I've been fans of for a long time, recommended it. I read it, and it wasn't that helpful. Maybe I'm not as creative as I need to be to get the most out of that book, but it wasn't anything like ground shaking. It wasn't super great. An even worse example is Hamza. I love Hamza. He got me onto self-improvement. I might not agree with everything he says because I'm pretty religious and everything, but much respect for Hamza. He recommended this book. He was raving about this book for months, The Way of the Superior Man. And it's sort of this new age spiritual look at masculinity, low-key stupid. New age spiritualism, absent religion, absent God, is stupid. Coming from a far more cohesive worldview of an actual religion and not just this agnostic, amorphous spiritualism. Reading that book, I was like, this is not useful for me. Maybe there were useful things in the book, but there were some things that I was reading that I just couldn't get over. So book recommendations aren't always perfect, but they're far better than pretending you know more than the people who have already gone through it. And in a similar vein, read authors that are trusted. I recently have been wanting to prioritize my sleep more, and I want to get into learning how to sleep better. And so I bought this book, Why We Sleep, by Matthew Walker. The reason I know about Matthew Walker, who is a PhD, like sleep neuroscientist or whatever, is because Andrew Huberman recommended him, had him on the podcast a couple times, and then recommended his book. I trust Andrew Huberman in the health and neuroscience field a good amount. And so, especially after hearing him talk too, I trust Matthew Walker. So I bought his book. Basically, vet the trust of the source of the recommendation or book rather than trying to vet the book itself. Not bulletproof, but pretty good. Revisit the bangers. Once again, books, not exclusively, but are mainly tools. Actually, he says this in the beginning of this book, Alex Ramosi. This book is intended to be a resource. As a resource, I mean it will be something you will read through and then keep in your toolbox, coming back to it again and again. If you read a book, it's very powerful, it's very impactful, full of value, actually practical, and helps you change. You should keep it in your vault or your toolbox of books that you go back to. Go back to it. Take more notes, synthesize it, reread it, meditate on it, and apply what you're learning. You want to apply what you read, and revisiting the bangers is such a high leverage way to do that. When you revisit, fully read certain sections, but also revisit certain specific chapters to solve a specific problem. What are the 20% of chapters that make the 80% of difference in your life? Again, when you revisit a banger, you don't have to arbitrarily commit to reading it cover to cover. Even if you read a book and only one chapter made the book a bang, made the book worth your time, made the book something that actually caused change in your life, made the book something that actually caused change in your life, the book is worth it. It was worth your time. Go back, only reread that chapter, study it. This is huge. What I'm about to tell you is really important. And I don't hear, I think, anyone talking about this in the way that I'm going to explain it to you. I cannot apply what I read from a self-help book or a business book faster than I can read it. I can consume information way quicker than I can apply it. So what I do is I usually have one book that I'm reading through that is super practical. It's about business or self-improvement, and I am reading it for the actionable steps in it. And until I'm done that book, when I'm reading a different book, I'm reading theology or philosophy. These are topics that I'm super interested in and that aren't as practically applicable. A lot of the work that would go into these topics is the learning, is the mentally working through what you're reading, which you can do without spending massive amounts of time like you would have to for business. I'd probably recommend that for most people. Read multiple books at once. Make sure that you're reading a practical book. And before you move on to another practical book, you at least apply one thing from that book. And in the meantime, read stuff to learn, but not necessarily as pragmatic books. What I'll do sometimes after I finish those super practical books is I will go through and I will write down every actionable step. This just makes it easier so I can in one spot glance at everything that was actionable in the book, so I don't have to read and sift through all of that broader context and conceptual stuff. I did it for this book, Inner Size. It's in a similar vein to Psycho-Cybernetics, how to change your identity and mental health, destroy limiting beliefs. And there's a ton of inner sizes, exercising your innards, sprinkled throughout the book. And so I literally went through and I wrote down every single actionable step and technique. I've learned the concepts, I know the science, and now I have everything that I can apply here. If you read a bunch of self-help books, but your life isn't changing, or if you read a bunch of business books, but you're not earning more money, you're not applying what you read. So don't overdo it with super practical books. Understand, retain, synthesize, and take action. Okay, so one caveat to the entire video. Books don't always have to be tools. I'm not saying this to pad what I'm saying for those people who are going to be like, I read Lord of the Rings. I'm not saying it for you. But as someone who's interested in videography, I can see this as well. Sometimes you can read for the story. I just picked up a copy of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is not going to apply to my life in any specific way, although something I think is genuinely beneficial is I want to get better at storytelling and writing, and reading good literature will help me do that. But also, I like Sherlock Holmes. I like the movies. I love the concept. I like the story of who he is. It's kind of out of the normal for me. I can't remember the last time I read fiction, but I did buy a book for the story. It's not the end of the world. However, most of your time shouldn't be spent reading stuff that doesn't improve your life. Books are mainly tools. Books are synthesized expertise in a subject that someone has taken a keen interest in. It would be wild to read with that not in mind. Books can change your life. They can offer you guidance, wisdom, and solutions that fast track progress faster than you understand, kind of like courses. So although I will preface, it is okay to sometimes read for enjoyment, or read for the story, or read to relax. I think this frame of mind that books are tools is so powerful. It gets you over the hurdle of feeling like you have to finish the book. You have to read it cover to cover. You have to glance over every word. It gets you over the hurdle of being obsessed about your book list that you get to post about at the end of the year. It gets you over these arbitrary standards. You realize that you're reading for your benefit. You're in control of how you are spending your time. I don't have enough time to focus the majority of my time reading on indulging in story. Enrapture my mind. Sometimes, for sure, but mainly, books are tools. I hope this video brought you value. Reading has genuinely altered the direction of my life. And so I hope this advice brings you as much value as it's brought me. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this video brought you value. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.